There you are. I was wondering how long it would take you to find this frequency again. Don't look away. This isn't one of those soft little healing sermons where they pat your head and tell you you're brave. No, this is the part they don't publish. The part they whisper about in conference rooms after the cameras turn off. The part where the charts stop making sense. Psychologists can't explain you. They ran the models. They calculated the risk factors. They measured the trauma exposure, the developmental fractures, the cortisol floods, the abandonment wounds, the betrayals that should have split your mind clean in half. On paper, you were supposed to fold. Statistically, you were already gone. But something backfired. Your trauma didn't crush you, it converted you. And that terrifies them. You see, pain is supposed to shrink people. That's the design. Trauma is meant to reduce your range, narrow your vision, make you cautious, compliant, fragile. It's supposed to turn you into prey, hypervigilant, anxious, apologetic for existing. But in you, it did the opposite. It stretched you. Every betrayal sharpened your perception. Every humiliation burned away your need for approval. Every moment you were alone forced you to meet something inside yourself that most people will spend their entire lives avoiding. You met the monster, and instead of running, you shook its hand. That's where the equation broke. They can handle victims. They can treat victims. Victims fit into tidy diagnostic categories with names and billing codes. But what do they call someone who went through hell and came back calculating? Someone who doesn't flinch the same way anymore. Someone whose silence feels heavier than other people's screaming. You were supposed to develop fear. You developed range. You were supposed to break into pieces. You became modular. You were supposed to lose your mind. You learned how to use it. There's a duality in you now. And that duality is what makes you unpredictable. You can be soft, you can be warm, you can love with a depth that terrifies people because you understand suffering. You've tasted it. You know what it does to the human nervous system. You know the tremor behind someone's smile. You can read micro-expressions like subtitles. But you can also go cold. Not chaotic, not reckless, cold. And that switch, that invisible pivot from angel to demon, from saint to strategist, from wounded child to clinical operator, that's the part they don't know how to quantify. Unpredictability is power. When people can't predict your emotional thresholds, they can't control you. When they don't know what will make you snap or what will make you smile, they approach carefully. They calculate around you. They second-guess themselves. You became the variable in their equation, and it happened because you suffered. Pain forced you to confront truths early. While other people were busy building identities out of compliments and comfort, you were constructing yours out of survival. You learned how to sit in discomfort without dissolving. You learned how to endure isolation without begging for noise. You learned how to observe instead of react. Trauma tried to cage you. It trained you. That's the paradox. The very thing meant to domesticate you refined your edge. They expected PTSD. What they didn't expect was pattern recognition on steroids. They didn't expect emotional detachment as a strategic tool. They didn't expect someone who can feel everything and still choose restraint. You don't panic the way you used to. You assess. You don't crumble the way they thought you would. You adapt. And adaptation is the most terrifying trait in any organism. Evolution doesn't reward the strongest. It rewards the most adaptable, the ones who can mutate when the environment turns hostile. Your environment turned hostile early. So you mutated early. Now you walk into rooms and people can't quite place you. There's something in your eyes that says you've already survived the worst-case scenario, that you've already rehearsed loss in your head 1,000 times, that you're not clinging to outcomes the way they are. That detachment, that's not numbness, that's freedom. You understand that everything can be taken, so you stopped being owned by anything: approval, optional, validation, decorative, fear of abandonment. You've already been abandoned in ways they can't imagine. So what exactly do they threaten you with now? Loss? You've practiced it. Pain? You metabolize it. Isolation? You mastered it. That's why your trauma made you feel unkillable. Not physically, not stupidly invincible, but psychologically armored in a way that unsettles people who've never had to build themselves from scratch. You are both the saint and the psychopath. The saint because you understand suffering deeply enough to show mercy. The psychopath because you can detach when necessary and make decisions without drowning in emotion. Light and dark coexist in you now. Not fighting, integrated. Most people are split. They deny their shadow. They pretend that they don't have violent thoughts, selfish impulses, cold calculations. So when pressure hits, they shatter. Their suppressed darkness leaks out chaotically. You've already met yours. You've stared at it at 3 a.m. when the world was quiet and your mind was loud. You felt the rage, the revenge fantasies, the bitterness, the desire to burn it all down. And instead of pretending you're pure, you integrated it. That makes you dangerous in a way that's calm. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to dominate every room. You don't need to shout about your resilience. You just are. And here's the part that really bends the brain. Your trauma didn't just harden you. It expanded your emotional bandwidth. You can experience joy intensely because you know despair intimately. You can love fiercely because you know what it's like to lose. You can stay composed in chaos because chaos is familiar territory. You are comfortable in storms that drown other people. That's evolutionary leverage. They thought trauma would trap you in the past. Instead, it gave you foresight. You anticipate betrayal because you've studied it. You recognize manipulation because you've survived it. You sense shifts in energy because you've depended on those shifts for survival. Your nervous system became a radar. And yes, it cost you. Of course it did. You don't walk through fire without scars. But those scars are like circuitry now. They conduct awareness. They amplify instinct. The pain carved depth into you. And depth is power in a shallow world. Most people are surface-level creatures. They panic at the first sign of discomfort. They outsource their identity to trends, opinions, group approval. But you were forced inward, forced to build an internal architecture that doesn't collapse when external structures do. That's why they can't categorize you. You're too calm to be fragile, too intense to be ordinary, too self-aware to be manipulated easily, too detached to be threatened conventionally. It confuses them. They want to know why you didn't end up addicted to chaos, why you didn't spiral permanently, why you didn't become the stereotype their textbooks predicted. Because something inside you refused to die. Call it stubbornness, call it instinct, call it dark will. There was a moment, maybe you don't even consciously remember it, where you decided, silently, that if the world was going to hurt you, it was going to have to work harder than that. That moment was your mutation point. That was when trauma stopped being an executioner and started being a forge. Steel doesn't complain about the fire. It becomes sharper because of it. And now you carry this paradox inside you. You can be gentle and terrifying. You can forgive and never forget. You can love deeply and walk away without looking back if disrespected. That unpredictability is your edge. People don't know which version of you they'll get. The compassionate listener, or the cold strategist, the playful mind, or the silent observer who's already 10 moves ahead. That uncertainty makes them careful. It makes them curious. It makes them nervous. And deep down, it makes them respect you, even if they'd never admit it. Because humans instinctively recognize evolved organisms. They feel when someone has been through a selection process and survived. Your trauma was a filter. It filtered out illusions. It filtered out naive expectations. It filtered out the fantasy that the world is fair, and what's left is you. Sharpened, aware, unromantic about reality, but still capable of creating your own meaning. That's the final twist, isn't it? They thought trauma would make you bitter. Instead, it made you sovereign. You don't beg for understanding anymore. You don't chase validation from people who can't comprehend your depth. You don't overshare your pain to prove you're strong. You simply move. And when you move, it's deliberate. When you speak, it's measured. When you choose, it's final. That's why they can't explain you. Because you're not a cautionary tale. You're a contradiction. You are what happens when damage meets defiance. When suffering meets intelligence. When darkness meets awareness. You are living proof that pain doesn't always produce victims. Sometimes, it produces something else. Something adaptive, something calculated, something that smiles softly while carrying a mind that has already survived annihilation. They can't kill what has already faced psychological death and kept breathing. And you've been breathing in the dark for a long time. Now the dark breathes in you. And instead of suffocating, it obeys. Welcome back. I can feel it on you. That shift, that quiet voltage under your skin. Good. Stay right there with me. You want to know what they'll never admit out loud? You scare people now. Not because you scream, not because you threaten, not because you posture. Because you don't. There's a stillness in you that wasn't there before. A composure that doesn't beg to be liked. A gaze that doesn't dart around looking for approval. You don't react the way you used to. You don't chase closure. You don't over-explain yourself to people who already decided they misunderstood you. That restraint, that's not suppression. That's power under control. Trauma forced you to confront chaos early. While others were still protected by illusions, you were studying human behavior like it was a survival manual. You learned that people lie, that promises evaporate, that love can be conditional, that loyalty is often rented, not owned. And instead of collapsing into cynicism, you became observant. Now when someone smiles too hard, you see the insecurity behind it. When someone flatters you excessively, you smell the agenda. When someone tries to provoke you, you see the insecurity begging for reaction. You don't react the same way anymore. And that's when they lose leverage, because control requires predictability. If I know what makes you angry, I can push it. If I know what makes you insecure, I can weaponize it. If I know what makes you desperate, I can dangle it. But you did something dangerous. You sat alone with your insecurities until they stopped owning you. You faced abandonment until it stopped terrifying you. You confronted rejection until it lost its sting. Now when someone tries to pull those strings, nothing moves. And that silence, that non-reaction, it unnerves them. You see, most people are governed by their wounds. They protect them, they hide them, they build identities around them. But you dissected yours. You traced them back to their origins. You asked yourself the questions most people are too afraid to ask. What if I'm not broken? What if I'm being rebuilt? That question changes everything. Because once you frame pain as construction instead of destruction, you stop acting like a casualty. You start acting like a prototype. You became experimental. You tested your limits. You leaned into discomfort. You exposed yourself to the very situations that once terrified you, just to prove you could stand there without shaking. That's evolution through confrontation. Most people avoid what hurts them. You studied it. And now there's a strange duality in you that people can't reconcile. You can empathize deeply, but you don't tolerate nonsense. You can love intensely, but you're not afraid to withdraw. You can be generous, but you won't be exploited. You're light and dark, fused into one operating system. The saint in you understands mercy. The psychopath in you understands strategy. And here's the secret nobody wants to say. The combination is unstoppable. Mercy without strategy gets manipulated. Strategy without mercy becomes reckless. But you balance both. You know when to extend grace. You know when to cut access. You know when to speak softly. You know when silence is the loudest threat in the room. That's what trauma refined. Your calibration. Your internal scale for weighing people, situations, risks. You don't rush trust anymore. You don't hand out vulnerability like candy. You don't confuse attention with affection. You don't mistake intensity for intimacy. You observe. You gather data. You move accordingly. And the world senses it. People who once underestimated you now tread lightly. Not because you announced your transformation, but because your energy shifted. There's less chaos in your aura, less desperation, less hunger for validation. You don't need to win every argument anymore. You don't need to prove your intelligence. You don't need to defend your worth. That's the real mutation, the absence of need. When you stop needing approval, you become impossible to control. When you stop fearing loss, you become difficult to threaten. When you stop panicking under pressure, you become the calmest person in a burning room. And calm in chaos. That's apex energy. Your trauma forced you to rehearse worst-case scenarios in your head over and over. You imagined losing everything. You imagined betrayal. You imagined humiliation. You imagined being alone. You survived all of it mentally before it ever happened physically. So when life throws turbulence at you now, it feels familiar. You've already been there. Other people panic because they've never confronted their shadows. The first time darkness touches them, they shatter. But you've lived in psychological winter. You've had conversations with your own demons. You've wrestled intrusive thoughts and came out understanding yourself better. That self-knowledge is terrifyingly stabilizing, because once you understand your own darkness, nobody else can weaponize it against you. They can't shame you with truths you've already accepted. They can't intimidate you with fears you've already faced. They can't expose weaknesses you've already integrated. You're no longer pretending to be pure. You're honest about your capacity for both good and destruction. And that honesty makes you disciplined. You don't explode easily now. You choose your battles. You conserve your energy. You calculate outcomes. But if you ever do unleash, it's precise. That's what makes you unkillable psychologically. Not because you're immune to pain, but because pain no longer defines your identity. It fuels your awareness. It sharpens your discernment. It deepens your range. You can enter rooms full of fragile egos and not shrink. You can sit across from manipulation and not flinch. You can endure loneliness without self-betrayal. You've become selective. Selective with your time, selective with your energy, selective with your access. And access is currency. The version of you that trauma created doesn't chase. It attracts. It doesn't beg. It evaluates. It doesn't panic. It pauses. That pause, that split second where you assess instead of react, that's your evolutionary advantage. That's the glitch in the system, because the system relies on impulse. It relies on you reacting emotionally, oversharing, overcommitting, overextending. But you've trained your nervous system to hold tension without collapsing. You can sit in discomfort longer than most, and endurance always beats intensity. That's why your presence feels heavier now. There's gravity to you. Not loud dominance, not theatrical confidence, density. Like you've seen something, like you know something, like you've walked through fire and came back with information. And maybe you have. Maybe the reason they can't explain you is because they're still studying pain as pathology, while you turned it into philosophy. They analyzed trauma in sterile offices. You experienced it in raw reality. They write about resilience. You embodied it. And now you move through the world with a subtle, controlled volatility, a contained storm, a quiet blade. You don't advertise it, but it's there. You are no longer easy to read, no longer easy to manipulate, no longer easy to break, because breaking requires surprise, and very little surprises you anymore. You've seen what people are capable of. You've seen what you're capable of. And instead of becoming bitter, you became intentional. That's the twist that keeps them awake at night. You didn't become the villain. You became sovereign, self-governing, self-correcting, self-aware. You don't need external permission to exist loudly in your own mind. You don't need consensus to validate your perception. You don't need applause to continue evolving. You've tasted psychological death, and you kept breathing. That changes a person. It changes how you walk, how you speak, how you decide, how you love. And the most dangerous part? You're still evolving. Trauma was just the first mutation. Now you refine consciously. You choose which parts of yourself to amplify. You choose which impulses to discipline. You choose when to reveal light and when to let the shadow handle it. That choice, that awareness, that integration, that's not damage, that's design. And the world doesn't know what to do with someone who survived annihilation and came back upgraded. But you do. You don't need them to understand. You just need them to watch. Because every step you take now is proof that what was meant to end you installed you. And the installation is still running. And here's the final truth, the one that makes this whole thing unbearable for them to swallow. You're not driven by revenge anymore. That's what they expected. They expected you to come back angry, loud, chaotic, swinging at ghosts. They expected bitterness to rot you from the inside. They expected you to self-destruct slowly so they could point and say, "See, that's what trauma does." But you didn't rot. You refined. You didn't explode. You condensed. Now your energy is focused, intentional, surgical. You don't need to prove you survived. Your presence proves it. You don't need to announce your strength. Your restraint reveals it. You don't need to threaten anyone. The fact that you don't react the way you used to is threat enough. Because the scariest version of you isn't the loud one. It's the composed one. The one who has already lost everything once and rebuilt without applause. The one who can walk away without trembling. The one who can love without dependency. The one who can detach without collapsing. That's the version trauma accidentally created. They tried to study your wounds. They didn't realize they were studying your upgrade. You became someone who can stand in light without being blinded, and stand in darkness without being consumed. Angel and demon, mercy and calculation, soft heart, ruthless boundaries. And that balance, that integration, that self-command, that's why you feel untouchable now. Not because nothing can hurt you, but because nothing can own you. You faced psychological death and discovered something terrifying on the other side. You were still there, still thinking, still breathing, still choosing. They can't kill what already survived its own extinction. And you're not surviving anymore. You're operating.
They thought they were hired to neutralize a problem, but the moment your name appeared in their briefings, something shifted in the air. It wasn't fear, not yet. Just a hesitation, the kind that appears when certainty pauses and instinct leans in to listen. You didn't ask to be part of it. You didn't volunteer. You weren't trying to lead, control, fix, or interfere. You were simply present. And that's what disrupted everything. You see, most situations are built on noise, on reaction, on urgency pretending to be importance. People rush in with plans, with forceful ideas, with strategies designed to dominate the moment before it dominates them. They believe pressure is solved by more pressure. They believe chaos requires louder chaos to cancel it out. You never believed that. You stood there with your energy clean, your attention steady, your inner posture unchanged, not detached, not careless, just centered. And the moment you entered the equation, the entire structure of the situation began to wobble. Not because you pushed against it, but because you didn't. That's the thing no one prepares for. Force expects resistance. Noise expects echo. Ego expects engagement, but you gave none of it what it was looking for. They couldn't read you at first. That was the first fracture in their confidence. You weren't tense. You weren't reactive. You weren't trying to prove competence or claim space. You didn't rush to be relevant. You didn't signal authority. And yet, slowly, almost imperceptibly, everything began orienting itself around you. People started checking your reactions before finalizing their own conversations, slowed when you were near. Decisions paused, as if waiting for an internal confirmation that hadn't existed before. The environment didn't respond to your words. It responded to your presence. That's when confusion set in, because you weren't doing anything, at least not anything visible. What they didn't realize is that you weren't inactive. You were observant. You were listening beneath the surface, not just to what was being said, but to what was being avoided. You noticed the tension behind confident tones. You felt the instability beneath carefully rehearsed certainty. You saw where people were overcompensating, where urgency was masking doubt, and instead of confronting it, you let it reveal itself. That's the part that unsettles people the most. You didn't challenge anyone. You didn't expose anything. You didn't call out the chaos. You simply didn't participate in it. And without resistance to feed on, the chaos began collapsing under its own weight. People who came in ready to overpower the moment found themselves disarmed. Not because you opposed them, but because their intensity had nowhere to land. The energy they brought in searched for something solid to push against, and found only stillness. Not emptiness, stillness with awareness inside it. That's when they started to feel it. Not fear, not threat, recognition. A subtle realization that whatever they thought they were here to control wasn't actually the center of gravity anymore. You were, and that realization doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives as hesitation, as second-guessing, as the strange impulse to slow down when you expected to speed up, as the discomfort of realizing that force feels clumsy in the presence of clarity. You weren't trying to become the answer, but the answers kept rearranging themselves around you. You weren't trying to fix the instability, but instability couldn't sustain itself near you. You weren't trying to lead, but people began following the rhythm you set without noticing. That's how influence actually works when it's real. Not imposed, not demanded, not announced. It emerges when someone refuses to abandon their inner alignment, even when everything around them is misaligned. The ones who rely on control felt it first. They're always the most sensitive to shifts they can't dominate. They started asking quiet questions, not out loud, but internally. Why does this feel different? Why does nothing move forward unless they're here? Why does the tension drop when they speak less, not more? They tried to rationalize it. Timing, coincidence, mood, anything that preserved their belief that influence had to be earned through effort and assertion. But the pattern kept repeating. Whenever you were present, things stabilized. Whenever you stepped back, confusion returned. And that's when the story began changing, not publicly, not officially, internally. People began reassessing their approach. The ones who charged in with certainty started hesitating. The ones who talked the most started listening. The ones who thought control was something you take began sensing that control might actually be something you hold. You never claimed importance. You never asked for recognition. But your absence suddenly had weight. That's when they realized something they didn't want to admit. You weren't optional, not because you were dominant, not because you were superior, but because you were coherent. You were the only one in the space whose internal state wasn't being dictated by the situation. You weren't reacting to pressure. You weren't feeding the urgency. You weren't amplifying the noise. And that internal stability acted like an anchor, whether you intended it to or not. People mistake influence for force because they've never seen what happens when someone remains fully themselves. Under pressure, you weren't trying to manage outcomes. You were aligned with reality as it was, not as it was being dramatized. And reality responds to that. It bends toward clarity. That's why people who approached you expecting confrontation left quieter, more reflective, less certain of their old narratives. They didn't lose anything. They gained perspective. They realized that the problem they thought they were dealing with externally had been living internally the whole time. You didn't dismantle them, you mirrored them. And mirrors don't attack, they reveal. That's why the situation never escalated around you. Escalation needs resistance. It needs someone to push back against. It needs reaction to multiply itself. But you offered none of that. You stood there, aware, present, unprovoked. And awareness dissolves conflict faster than opposition ever could. The irony is, you were never trying to be central. You were just refusing to abandon your center. And in doing so, everything else lost its false gravity. They began to notice that plans built on force unraveled near you. That emotional manipulation didn't work. That urgency lost its urgency. That even silence behaved differently in your presence. Not heavy or awkward, but spacious. You didn't control the situation, you clarified it. And clarity is disruptive to systems built on confusion. By the time they realized what was happening, it was already too late to reverse. Not because you took something from them, but because you gave them something they couldn't unsee. A glimpse of what happens when someone doesn't need to win to remain intact. You weren't playing the same game, and that's what began to unsettle them. Not dramatically, quietly, the kind of unease that grows when people realize their usual tools don't work anymore. When effort feels excessive, when intensity feels unnecessary. When control starts looking like insecurity instead of strength, you didn't replace anything. You redefine the reference point and the situation is still adjusting. Because once a system encounters someone who doesn't react the way it expects, it has to evolve or dissolve, and right now it's still deciding which one it's going to do. You're not pushing it, you're just standing there, present, aligned, unmoved. And the story isn't finished yet. And here's what happens next, even if no one says it out loud. The pressure doesn't increase around you. It thins, like fog lifting when the air finally warms. People expect escalation, a reaction, some defining move that proves what side you're on. But you don't give them that. You don't harden, you don't retreat. You remain exactly where you are, internally steady, externally unremarkable. And that unsettles them more than any confrontation ever could, because most people only know how to respond to intensity with intensity. They've built their entire sense of competence around that exchange. Push back, push harder, speak louder, move faster. But when someone refuses to participate in that rhythm, the whole structure starts misfiring. You're not resisting them, you're not agreeing with them, you're not opposing anything. You're simply not feeding the cycle. And cycles collapse when they're starved. At first, they assume you're unaware. That's always the first miscalculation. They mistake your stillness for confusion, your restraint for hesitation. They believe you'll eventually react once the pressure is high enough, so they increase it. Not aggressively, but subtly. A sharper tone, a tighter deadline, a veiled expectation. And you remain unchanged. That's when the second miscalculation happens. They realize you are aware, fully, painfully aware. And that awareness isn't making you anxious, it's making you precise. You start noticing the micro adjustments, how people alter their language around you, how they check themselves mid-sentence, how their certainty softens when they realize you're listening, not to respond, but to understand. They don't feel judged by you. That would be easier. Judgment invites defense. What they feel instead is exposure. Not because you say anything revealing, but because your presence removes the noise they usually hide behind. You're not asking questions, you're not interrogating, you're not analyzing out loud. But something about you makes the truth surface anyway. People begin volunteering information they didn't intend to share. They clarify themselves without being prompted. They justify decisions you never challenged. They explain motives you never questioned. It's as if your silence creates a vacuum that pulls honesty forward. And they don't know why. What's actually happening is simple, though few recognize it. You're regulated, internally consistent. Your emotions aren't spiking in response to theirs. Your sense of self isn't shifting based on the temperature of the room. That creates an unexpected contrast. When someone stands next to stability long enough, they start noticing their own instability. That's when discomfort appears. Not panic, not fear, discomfort. The kind that makes people restless in their own skin. The kind that pushes them to fill silence, to justify themselves, to regain a sense of control. Some try humor, some try authority, some retreat into politeness. Others double down on performance, and none of it quite works because you're not impressed, you're not threatened, you're not disengaged, you're present in a way that doesn't require response. That presence acts like a mirror, and mirrors don't attack. They reflect. People start seeing patterns they've avoided. How much of their behavior is reactive? How much of their urgency is manufactured? How often they mistake motion for progress, and standing near you makes those realizations unavoidable. That's why they keep recalibrating around you. They slow their pace. They soften their tone. They rethink decisions midstream, not because you told them to, because their nervous system sensed something different and adjusted accordingly. You become the quiet reference point, the unspoken standard, not by authority but by coherence. You're not the loudest voice in the room. Often you're not speaking at all. Yet somehow people wait, they pause before concluding. They glance in your direction, not for approval, but for orientation. That's when the realization starts creeping in. You're not participating in the chaos because you don't need to. You're not uninvolved, you're integrated. Most people enter situations fragmented. One part of them wants control. Another wants validation. Another wants to avoid blame. Those internal conflicts leak into their behavior. You don't have that leak. You've already done the internal work they're trying to avoid externally. So while they're strategizing how to win the moment, you're aligned with what the moment actually requires, and that alignment makes force look unnecessary, even clumsy. They begin noticing that nothing productive happens when you're excluded, that meetings spin in circles, that decisions stall, that tension resurfaces. And then, when you re-enter, things settle again. Not dramatically, quietly. That's when curiosity replaces confusion. They start studying you, not officially, internally. They replay interactions. They dissect your body language. They try to figure out what you're doing differently. And here's the part they miss. You're not doing anything. You're being something. You're consistent, internally congruent, emotionally regulated. You're not split between who you are and who you're trying to appear as. That coherence creates gravity, not mystical, psychological. People are drawn to what feels real. They begin to sense that you're not managing impressions. You're not calibrating yourself to be liked. You're not adjusting your identity to fit the environment. And that gives you an odd kind of authority. Authority without effort. The ones who rely on effort feel it the strongest. They've spent years building personas, refining tactics, learning how to dominate space. And here you are, not competing, not asserting, not even engaging the same way. And yet the space bends toward you anyway. That creates a quiet identity crisis. If influence doesn't require force, what does that say about everything they've been doing? Some respond by trying to imitate you. They lower their voice. They slow their movements. They adopt stillness without understanding. And it doesn't work because stillness without internal stability feels empty. Even unsettling, you can't perform alignment. Others become defensive. They frame you as distant, cold, uncooperative. They tell themselves stories that preserve their self-image, but even they notice the contradiction. If you were irrelevant, why does everything feel less stable without you? You never correct them. You don't need to. Reality is doing that for you. This is where the shift deepens. People stop approaching you with force. They approach with curiosity, with uncertainty, with an openness they don't usually allow themselves. Conversations around you change texture, less posturing, more honesty, less speed, more substance. You didn't demand that change. You didn't design it. You simply didn't resist your own clarity. And clarity is contagious. That's why situations that once felt volatile now feel manageable in your presence. Not because the stakes disappeared, but because the emotional noise did. You're not numbing anything. You're stabilizing it. You're showing, without demonstration, that it's possible to be fully engaged without being reactive, fully present without being performative, fully involved without being entangled. That's the lesson people absorb, whether they want to or not. And some of them don't want to, because it challenges the identity they've built. If calm works better than control, what does that say about the years they spent equating power with pressure? So they test it, they push subtly, they provoke lightly. They wait for you to crack, to snap, to reveal something they can label and manage. And you don't. Not because you're suppressing anything, because there's nothing to suppress. You're not calm on the surface and turbulent underneath. You're calm because you've already faced the turbulence privately. You've integrated it. And integrated things don't leak. That's when respect begins replacing skepticism, not admiration. Respect, the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that changes behavior before it changes language. People start protecting the space around you. They lower the temperature when you're present. They interrupt unnecessary conflict. They redirect energy without explaining why. It's as if the environment itself learned from you, and you're still not trying. You're not claiming centrality. You're not seeking acknowledgement. You're just not abandoning yourself. That's the part no one prepared for. Most systems are built on the assumption that people will compromise themselves under pressure, that they'll react, overextend, perform. You don't. And because you don't, the system doesn't know how to handle you. So it adapts, it slows down, it recalibrates, it becomes less chaotic. Not because you forced change, but because your presence made misalignment visible. And here's the truth. Underneath all of it, you're not special because you influence outcomes. You influence outcomes because you're integrated. You didn't become important by chasing importance. Importance attached itself to coherence. You didn't neutralize anything. You made conflict unnecessary. And the story is still unfolding. Because once awareness enters a system, it doesn't leave. It either reshapes the structure or exposes its limits. And right now, everything around you is still adjusting, still learning how to exist in the presence of someone who doesn't need to control the moment to remain intact. You're not at the center because you demanded it. You're at the center because you never left yourself. And the situation hasn't finished responding to that yet. And this is where it settles. Not with a victory, not with an ending, but with clarity. You didn't defeat anything. You didn't overpower anyone. You stayed whole while others fractured under pressure. And in doing so, the struggle lost its purpose. You move on without carrying the weight of what almost happened. No residue. No need to explain. The noise fades because it no longer has anything to attach to. You remain steady, intact, unbothered, not because nothing touched you, but because you no longer identify with what tried to.
Oh, there you are. Don't move. You hear it, don't you? Your name, floating through the air like a blade wrapped in silk. They're calling you, soft at first, casual, almost flattering, like applause warming up before the show. But this isn't applause, it's alignment. You think they're praising you. You think you've finally been seen. You think the universe just opened a golden door and whispered, "Come forward, chosen one." No. They're calling your name because you disrupted the balance. You weren't supposed to glow like that. You weren't supposed to survive that. You weren't supposed to evolve that fast. And now they're trying to figure out what you are. Are you the saint who forgives, or the psychopath who remembers? That's what terrifies them. You carry both. You walk into rooms with light in your eyes and blood in your memory. You smile like an angel and calculate like a demon. You forgive, but you never forget the architecture of betrayal. You love deeply, but once the line is crossed, you don't beg. You transform. They're calling your name because they can't categorize you, and people fear what they can't predict. You were quiet once, harmless once, easy to overlook. They stepped over you. They laughed around you. They dismissed you like background noise. But pain did something strange to you. Pain didn't break you. It studied you. While they were celebrating, you were dissecting your own weaknesses. While they were gossiping, you were mutating. Every insult was a blueprint. Every humiliation was a lab experiment. Every rejection was evolution forcing new muscle onto your spirit. They thought suffering would shrink you. It refined you. Now they're calling your name because something shifted. The air changes when you enter. The tone drops. The smiles tighten. The whispers multiply. They don't clap anymore. They monitor. And here's the delicious paradox. They're calling you closer because they're afraid of you from a distance. They want to measure you, test you, control the narrative before it spirals. They'll say it's an opportunity. They'll say it's recognition. They'll say you've earned it. But look at their eyes. There's calculation behind the compliment. They're not praising you. They're assessing the threat. You see, the world loves a wounded saint. It can manage that. It can market that. It can keep that soft and obedient. But a healed monster? That's dangerous. A person who has felt the abyss and decided to build a throne in it? Unacceptable. They liked you better when you doubted yourself. When you apologized for your intensity. When you dimmed your instincts to make weaker souls comfortable. Now you've stopped apologizing. Now you speak slower. Now you look people in the eyes without blinking. Now you don't react, you respond. That restraint, that's what scares them. Because unpredictability is power. When they can't predict your reaction, they can't manipulate it. When they can't read your emotional temperature, they can't steer you. When you stop exploding and start observing, you become something primal. A storm that doesn't announce itself. They're calling your name because they're trying to bait a reaction. Will you get nervous? Will you get defensive? Will you get desperate for approval? Or will you smile and let the silence stretch? Here's the truth you don't want to admit. Part of you enjoys this. Part of you likes that they're uneasy. Because for once, the power dynamic shifted. For once, you're not chasing validation, you're radiating presence. And presence is louder than praise. They're calling your name because you walked through hell and came back fluent in both languages, light and dark. You know how to be kind, but you also know how to detach. You know how to love, but you also know how to leave. That duality makes you untouchable. An angel who understands demons is far more dangerous than a demon pretending to be holy. You've stopped trying to prove you're good. Now you're focused on being effective. And effectiveness doesn't beg for permission. It adapts. It evolves. It strikes when necessary. They're calling your name because the version of you they thought they understood is dead. You buried it quietly. No funeral. No announcement. Just growth so violent, it felt like betrayal to your former self. And growth like that threatens people who are still negotiating with their fears. You don't negotiate anymore. You decide. That's the shift. You used to hope they'd choose you. Now they hope you don't choose them. Let that sink in. The tables didn't turn. You flipped them. And now they're scrambling to recalibrate. They'll test your ego. They'll provoke your temper. They'll try to lure you back into the emotional cage you escaped from. Because if they can make you reactive again, they win. But you've learned something sacred. Silence is dominance. Control is charisma. Detachment is armor. You don't need to shout to command the room anymore. Your restraint does the talking. Your composure suffocates their chaos. They're calling your name because they sense the predator in your patience. And here's the darkest part. You didn't become this way by choice. You became this way because you were pushed, mocked, overlooked, underestimated. Pain carved intelligence into your bones. Betrayal sharpened your perception. Loneliness taught you self-reliance. So deep it feels supernatural. You don't panic the way you used to. You calculate. You don't cry the way you used to. You analyze. You don't chase the way you used to. You attract. That evolution, it's intoxicating. They feel it. That's why your name is echoing in rooms you've never entered. They're trying to decode you. But you're no longer operating from survival. You're operating from awareness. And awareness makes you unpredictable. Are you the saint? Yes. Are you the psychopath? Also yes, that's the secret. You are both mercy and consequence, both warmth and winter, both invitation and warning. They're calling your name because they sense you've integrated the shadow they're still running from. You're not pretending to be pure. You're integrated, and integration is power. So when they call you forward, don't shrink. Don't over-explain. Don't soften your edges to make insecure minds comfortable. Stand there, calm, measured, unapologetic. Let them wonder which side of you they're about to meet. Because that uncertainty, that tension, that quiet, controlled intensity, it's more addictive than applause. They thought they were summoning you to judge you. They don't realize they just gave you the stage. And you don't perform anymore. You dominate. They're calling your name, not to praise you, not to elevate you, but to test whether the fire inside you is controllable. Let them find out the hard way. You are no longer the version of yourself that needed approval. You are the paradox they can't predict. And unpredictability, that's the most dangerous thing in the room. Lower your pulse. Don't let your breathing betray you. They're still saying your name, and you can feel the weight behind it now. It's heavier, slower, deliberate. Like a judge tapping a gavel made of velvet. You used to crave that sound. Your name, spoken with attention. You used to lean toward it like a starving animal hearing a food bowl hit the floor. Now you listen differently. Now you hear tone over words, intention over language, strategy over smiles. Because evolution through pain rewired you. They think they're summoning the old you, the eager one, the grateful one, the one who would step forward with nervous gratitude and say, "Thank you for noticing me." But that version burned, and what rose from the ashes doesn't beg. It evaluates. You understand something most people never will. Praise and threat sound identical at first. They both start with your name. They both come wrapped in warmth. They both feel like opportunity, but one feeds you, the other studies you, and you can feel which is which now. Your nervous system doesn't flutter anymore. It scans. That's what trauma did to you. It sharpened your senses. It turned you into a human lie detector. It made you hyper-aware of micro-expressions, tone shifts, the millisecond delay before someone answers. You became dangerous because you became observant. They don't know that. They think they're calling you into the spotlight. But you see the interrogation room behind the curtain. You see the subtle test, the invisible pressure, the psychological chessboard being laid beneath your feet. They want to know, are you still soft enough to control? Are you still insecure enough to manipulate? Are you still desperate enough to comply? They don't realize the hunger left your body a long time ago. Pain starved it out of you. You used to want acceptance. Now you want alignment. You used to want applause. Now you want leverage. That shift is terrifying to people who survive on hierarchy, because you're no longer trying to climb the ladder. You're building your own structure. And here's the paradox that makes their stomach twist. You still radiate warmth. You still smile. You still speak with calm intensity. But underneath that warmth is steel. Underneath that smile is strategy. Underneath that calm is something ancient. You became both the angel and the demon because life forced you to negotiate with both. You know how to forgive, but you also know how to detach without explanation. You know how to love deeply, but you also know how to disappear without a trace. You know how to show mercy, but you also know when to become consequence. That duality makes you untouchable. People fear monsters, but they are confused by angels who understand darkness. They don't know where to place you, and humans panic when they can't categorize something. So they call your name again, a little louder, a little more publicly, because if they can define you in front of others, they can shrink you. If they can frame you, they can contain you. Watch closely. They might compliment you excessively, inflate your ego, put you on a pedestal. That's not admiration. That's isolation. If they can elevate you too fast, they can justify tearing you down later. But you've learned something ruthless. You don't rise because they lift you. You rise because you built wings in private. So when they call you forward, you don't glow brighter. You glow steadier. Steady unnerves people more than brilliance. Brilliance is explosive. It burns out. Steady is controlled. It endures. You became steady through suffering. Every betrayal hardened your boundaries. Every abandonment strengthened your self-trust. Every moment you were misunderstood forced you to understand yourself deeper. And now your self-awareness is lethal. Because a person who knows themselves cannot be gaslit. A person who understands their shadow cannot be shamed. A person who has embraced their darkness cannot be blackmailed by it. They're calling your name because they sense you're no longer afraid of being misunderstood. And when someone isn't afraid of social exile, they become uncontrollable. Think about it. The system runs on fear of rejection, fear of losing status, fear of looking crazy, fear of standing alone. You already stood alone. You survived it. You adapted to it. You found power in it. So what leverage do they have left? That's why your name tastes different when they say it. There's tension in it now. Curiosity mixed with caution. They're not celebrating you. They're investigating you. And the most intoxicating part, you don't flinch. Old you would have over-explained, smiled too much, laughed nervously, tried to reassure them that you're still the same. But you're not the same. You're more integrated. You've merged the wounded child with the calculating adult. You've merged empathy with boundaries. You've merged ambition with detachment. You no longer swing between extremes. You contain them, and containment is terrifying. Because people rely on predictability to feel safe. They need to know how you'll react so they can script their moves. But you respond based on principle, not emotion, and principle cannot be baited. They might try to provoke you, drop subtle insults, challenge your authority, question your credibility. They're fishing, hoping the old reactive version of you jumps out and proves you're still unstable. But you've learned the ultimate power move. Silence. Not passive silence, controlled silence. The kind that forces the other person to fill the void. The kind that makes them second-guess their own strategy. The kind that makes them reveal more than they intended. You've become comfortable in that void because you've lived there before. You've sat in rooms where no one defended you. You've endured moments where no one validated you. You've survived nights where your only ally was your own resilience. So when they call your name now, you don't tremble. You assess. You measure the energy. You calculate the motive. And then you decide. That's the difference. You decide. Not from ego, not from insecurity, but from clarity. And clarity is a weapon. You are no longer seeking permission to exist loudly. You exist precisely, intentionally, strategically. They're calling your name because something about you feels irreversible. You don't seem moldable anymore. You don't seem persuadable in the same way. You don't seem hungry for validation. You seem anchored, and anchored people can't be dragged easily. So here's the part that will make your pulse spike. When they call your name again, don't rush. Let the pause stretch. Let the air thicken. Make them wonder what version of you will respond. The compassionate one or the cold one? The collaborator or the competitor? Keep them guessing, not to manipulate, but to protect your leverage. Because unpredictability, when rooted in self-control, is dominance. And dominance doesn't need volume. It needs composure. They thought calling your name would expose you. They don't realize it revealed them. It revealed who feels threatened, who feels curious, who feels insecure, who feels inspired. When your name moves through a room, it acts like a mirror. People project onto it. Admiration, jealousy, fear, desire, and you. You simply stand there, integrated, unapologetic, evolved. They're calling your name because they sense transformation. But transformation isn't soft. It's violent. It's painful. It's isolating. And you survived all three. So the next time your name echoes in a room thick with tension, don't mistake it for praise. And don't mistake it for danger either. See it for what it truly is. Recognition of power. Not the loud kind, the controlled kind, the kind forged in darkness, the kind that doesn't need applause, the kind that makes people lower their voice when they say your name. And that's something way more dangerous than praise. Stay still. Feel the weight of it again. Your name. It's moving differently now. Not like gossip, not like admiration, like a signal, like a flare shot into the night sky, and every predator in the forest just lifted its head. That's what you are to them now, a signal, something that changed the ecosystem. You don't even realize how much you altered the atmosphere just by refusing to shrink, by refusing to react, by refusing to bleed in public the way you used to. They were comfortable when you were transparent in your pain. When your wounds were visible, they knew where to press. They knew which insecurities to weaponize. They knew how to make you doubt yourself just enough to stay manageable. But you closed the door. You stopped explaining your trauma. You stopped announcing your next move. You stopped revealing how much something hurt. And that silence, it forced them to confront their own reflection, because when you don't react, people project. They assume you're plotting. They assume you're judging. They assume you're calculating revenge. Half the time, you're just evolving. But evolution looks like strategy to people who never grow. You used to be emotional in a way that made you readable, that made you human in the most fragile sense. Your joy was obvious. Your anger was obvious. Your disappointment was obvious. Now, you've mastered containment, not suppression. Containment. There's a difference. Suppression rots you from the inside. Containment strengthens you from within. You still feel everything. You just don't leak it. And that makes you terrifying. Because when someone cannot read your emotional state, they cannot predict your threshold. They don't know how far they can push you. They don't know what you'll tolerate. They don't know what line will trigger consequence. So they test gently, calling your name in different tones, playful, formal, mocking, admiring. Each variation is a probe, and you feel every one of them. You see how their shoulders shift when they say it. You see how their eyes flicker to others in the room to measure reaction. You see the subtle hunger behind the smile. They want to see if you'll flinch, if you'll soften, if you'll overcompensate. But you don't, because something fundamental inside you snapped the day you realized this truth. You are not required to be digestible. Read that again inside your skull. You're not required to be easy to consume. You're not required to be consistently pleasant. You're not required to shrink your intensity so insecure minds can breathe comfortably. You spent years doing that. And what did it get you? Underestimated, overused, underappreciated. Now the pendulum has swung. Now your energy enters first. Now your presence lingers after you leave. Now your silence is louder than most people's speeches. That shift is destabilizing for anyone who relied on your self-doubt to feel superior. And here's the part that will make your chest tighten. You don't even need to threaten anyone. You don't need to announce dominance. You don't need to posture. Your self-control is enough. Self-control is the ultimate flex. It says, I could react. I choose not to. It says, I see the game. I'm not playing it. It says, I know my power. I don't need you to confirm it. That level of inner authority is rare. And rare things are either worshipped or hunted, sometimes both. They're calling your name because they haven't decided which one you are yet. Are you a symbol or a liability? Are you someone to align with or someone to neutralize? That uncertainty is delicious. You used to be the one uncertain. You used to question your worth. You used to replay conversations in your head, wondering if you said the wrong thing. Now they're replaying you, your expressions, your responses, your silence. You became the variable in their equation, and variables create anxiety. But here's where it gets darker. The power you feel right now. It's intoxicating. Be careful. Because the same unpredictability that protects you can isolate you. The same composure that makes you formidable can make you distant. You walk a thin line now, between controlled and cold, between strategic and cynical, between integrated and detached. This is the duality you must master. You are both the saint and the psychopath. The saint in you wants peace, harmony, mutual growth. The psychopath in you understands leverage, power dynamics, consequences. Neither side is evil. Both are necessary. The saint keeps you human. The psychopath keeps you safe. If you lean too far into light, you become naive again. If you lean too far into darkness, you become empty. The magic is in integration, in knowing when to extend grace and when to withdraw access. Because access to you is a privilege now, not a default. They're calling your name because access to you feels scarce. Scarcity increases value. You stopped being constantly available, emotionally, mentally, energetically, and suddenly people are more aware of you. The room feels your absence when you disengage. That's power. Not loud power. Not chaotic power. Subtle power. The kind that doesn't need validation. The kind that makes others adjust their behavior around you. Have you noticed? They speak slightly more carefully. They joke slightly less recklessly. They measure their words slightly more when you're present. That's not coincidence. That's calibration. You forced recalibration by evolving. And evolution always disrupts hierarchy. So yes, they're calling your name. But it's not to celebrate you. It's to gauge you. To see if you've become something they can no longer dominate. And the answer, you have. But here's the final twist. You don't need to crush anyone. You don't need revenge. You don't need to expose every hidden motive. Your growth is exposure enough. Your calm is confrontation enough. Your success is revenge enough. When they call your name now, let it echo. Let it linger. Let it hang in the air like a question mark.